The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to those expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the OSIP Foundation Incorporated or any other group or individual. This podcast may contain dialogue or subject material that could be considered for mature audiences only. All aspects of how you play the game and the OSIP Foundation Incorporated are protected by copyright and other state and federal intellectual property laws. Unauthorized use without the express written consent of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated is strictly prohibited. If you're interested in sponsoring How You Play the Game, please email us at podcast@osipfoundation.org. Your sponsorship may be tax deductible. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of How You Play the Game, the official podcast of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, with you as we talk about what's going on as far as the world of sportsmanship is concerned. This is the second episode of the month of July. The year is 2026. As always, check us out online at osipfoundation.org. If you'd like to contact the show, please use the email address podcast@osipfoundation.org. And on the socials, we're at facebook.com/osipfoundation, X and Instagram at osipfoundation, hashtag how you play the game. As we are in the middle of the summer, I think it's apropos that we're going to continue to talk a little baseball right now. There are two things that kind of came across the proverbial desk when it comes to some sportsmanship in Major League Baseball that are worthy of examination. So the first thing is that it was announced that there are 7 umpires who have accepted a buyout from Major League Baseball in order to retire at the end of this season. And the reason that this became popular in the news is because, Major League Baseball, especially lately, has always had an issue amongst the fans and throughout social media with how umpires are viewed and, more importantly, vilified. We can all kind of go back to Angel Hernandez and how people vilified him very unfairly to the point where he was essentially offered a buyout to, as some people put it, go away. So with that, we had another incident where C.B. Buckner, who's another umpire who gets unfairly vilified, basically he's been out with the concussion issue, and they have basically taken the opportunity to try and do the same thing with him by buying him out. Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, we can make the argument that ABS has changed things and whatnot, and it's kind of exposed the umpires for who are the good ones and who might not be as good or who need to adapt or whatever. I mean, that's not really the point here of this conversation. The scope of this conversation is more about the reaction that happened, especially on social media, to the news that these 7 umpires were going to retire. And a lot of it started with, celebration that C.B. Buckner is retiring, which to me is misinformed. And completely just inaccurate in terms of this, the celebration that's occurring. I mean, if you want to have the discussion over how he has gotten unfairly vilified, we can do that. But again, that's not really the point here. The point that I want to make is that people, I don't expect people to know this because it's not widely known, but the collective bargaining agreement that was ratified for the umpires, I believe it was before the 2025 season, like maybe it was late 2024 when it was ratified. If I'm off by a year one way or the other, okay, then forgive me. But anyway, in that CBA, one of the stipulations was that if Major League Baseball were to offer a buyout to an umpire, for whatever reason, they are required to offer that same buyout to all umpires who are around that same age and or years of experience in order to keep it uniform. And that's what happened here. Sure, Major League Baseball wanted to offer the buyout to C.B. Buckner, but then 6 other umpires who were all around the same age said, geez, this is kind of a good deal. And many people have been in situations, regardless of the profession, where they look at the buyout and they go, I got to take this. One of my high school band director, that happened to him. He said he was years prior to retirement, but he said they offered me a buyout. I crunched the numbers. I said, I can't pass this up. So he retired early. And that's kind of what these guys are doing. Marvin Hudson, who's one of the umpires who accepted the buyout, was actually thinking about retiring at the end of this year anyway. So the buyout made sense for him. You see what I'm saying? I firmly believe that some of these umpires were, maybe were considering it or maybe weren't considering it. And then when they were offered the deal, they said, yeah, this is my opportunity to get out. I know Tony Randazzo, who accepted it. He's been injured off and on. And he's like, yeah, this is a great opportunity for me to retire. So it's not so much about Major League Baseball getting rid of the bad umpires. Okay. It's more about understanding that collective bargaining plays a role in this, and that baseball is the variable. Look at any other union in any other walk of life. This is a very common thing if it can be negotiated properly. So before you go off and judge these 7 umpires for getting out of the game, realize that the buyout is a collectively bargained stipulation that actually helps these guys come out ahead. And maybe you can make the argument that this is good for the game because these are older guys who really aren't prepared for or aren't going to be comfortable with the ABS or anything. Maybe you can make that argument. That's kind of outside the scope of this discussion right now. Okay? I just want people to understand that this exodus of umpires in this manner is more than just MLB trying to get rid of what they perceive to be a bad umpire. Okay? And I guarantee you that another umpire will be vilified somehow. It's a stupid, unfortunate problem. Out of the 70 some odd umpires that are full time in Major League Baseball, I think there's 74. One of them's always going to rank 74th out of 74. But remember, that 74th umpire is still the 74th best umpire in the world. So don't ever forget that. The second thing deals with the All-Star game. The Philadelphia Phillies pitcher, Zach Wheeler, actually turned down an opportunity to be an All-Star. Okay? He was not selected to the initial team when the rosters were released on July 4th. And we all know that as the week goes on, there are always people added as replacements and whatnot. That's kind of become a staple of the All-Star process because there are a lot of people who get voted in as the starters by the fans who are injured. So Aaron Judge won't be playing in the All-Star game. So there's a lot of formalities and things like that. Okay, and remember that pitchers are always very delicate because there's no fan vote for the pitchers, okay? Because they're very protective of the arm. So you're only looking at player vote, coach's vote, and commissioner input, essentially. So he was left off, but so many pitchers, I feel, are usually added later as the week goes on because of the people who do not want to participate. And remember that they have added additional rules that state that you have to be very careful with these pitchers. If you pitch the Sunday before, if you're a starter on the Sunday before the All-Star game, you're technically ineligible because they want to protect the arms. Okay, I believe the rule was originally very stringent on that, and now it's been somewhat amended so that a lot of it is in the control of the team, and the team gets to dictate exactly what they want to do with their pitcher. But for all intents and purposes, that is the rule. Okay. And he was asked, I believe, just recently, do you want to be, we'd like to name you to the All-Star team. And he said no. He says, I think I'm like the 5th guy down, and I'm not going to be disrespected like that. I feel like again, the scope of the argument here is not so much to determine whether or not he was a snub, because that's a separate argument for sports talk radio. Okay. Was he a snub? We can certainly make that argument. All right. And I'm sure that there are others who feel like he was not a snub. In my own estimation, as I was looking at people who were snubbed from the All-Star team, I think you can make the argument that he was, but there were so many other people, I think, who were also in that category of pitchers who were snubbed for the National League that I understand why he was at the bottom of the list compared to everybody else. So the point here is that he's going to cut his nose to spite his face. I understand he doesn't want to be disrespected. I'm not trying to negate that. What I'm trying to say is that it's in your ballpark. If you are named an All-Star and you go and you participate in the festivities, all right, you're going to make some money. You don't have to pitch, and you're saying that this is BS. I mean, I feel like that's something where if you're really going to have that kind of response to it, you have to take a step back and say, maybe I need to sleep on this for 24 hours. Because instead, what he's just done is he's created another firestorm that he doesn't really need. It starts going more towards the argument of, these athletes and some of the decisions that they make and the perceptions that we have of them, because we view them a certain way. And sometimes we look at these guys as like dumb jocks, whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. And then a decision like this gets made, and you're like, geez, that's kind of a stupid decision, in my opinion. If you get there was another great point that was brought up to me that I think is really important, and another reason why I feel like Zach Wheeler should have still accepted to go the invite to the All-Star game. Okay, when you look at statistics, when you look at the history of the game, okay, the way that we judge players, especially in the context of, say, like the Hall of Fame, is sometimes the numbers don't hold the weight that they used to have. Okay, sometimes the numbers of 300 wins, for a starting pitcher, that's a pipe dream now. Okay, these guys do not get anywhere close to that. The 3,000 hit mark, the 3,000 strikeout mark, the 500 home run mark. Some of those numbers are very, very difficult to achieve. And so when we judge the greatness, we're contextualizing that judgment around other things now. Okay, we're using statistics like WAR and were they the best player at their position during their time frame and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways that we're judging them. That old school feeling of that's a Hall of Famer because of that. That intrinsic knowing that that's not there the same way. So we look for some of that black type next to their name, and being named to an All-Star team is one of those black types. Whether you played in the game or not, having that next to your name has value to it. So if Zach Wheeler wants to make a case for his greatness, you need all of the All-Star selections added to that you can get. Someone who's a 10-time All-Star, that's saying something. You know what I mean? So imagine just for argument's sake, play along with me here. Imagine this was Zach Wheeler's only All-Star nod, and he said no. And then he doesn't get another one his entire career. He'd be kicking himself. There are other players who would kill to be named an All-Star. And he said, I'm not going to be disrespected like that. Okay? Guess what? You can have your cake and eat it too here. Two things can be true at the same time. You can come out publicly and say, I'm going to go, but I want everyone to know that I feel very disrespected. In fact, considering the Philadelphia fan base, doing that probably endears him to the fan base even more. Think about that. Think about him saying I vulnerably believe that I'm being disrespected here, but I'm going because I recognize the importance of this. Instead, he just said, no, I'm not going. I'm not going to be disrespected. I understand the emotion behind it. I'm not trying to invalidate the emotion of what he's saying and what he's feeling and what he's deciding. But if wisdom has taught me anything, it's that maybe, just maybe, you should have thought this one through a little bit more. Just a teeny bit. Especially, don't forget the surgery that he just had recently. He had a blood clot? and he came back from that, and he's pitching like he's pitching, maybe a little gratitude isn't the worst idea in the world here. So, I understand, not trying to negate anything, but if I were a wise sage, I might say, maybe you'd want to think about it a little bit more. Just a thought. Just a thought. Anyway, that's all for this edition. Glad you joined us for this one. We'll talk to everybody in just a couple of weeks. Remember, we're at osafoundation.org, podcast at osafoundation.org, facebook.com/osafoundation, X and Instagram at osafoundation, hashtag how you play the game. We'll talk to everybody soon. Until then, treat each other with respect. How You Play the Game is a production of the OSIP Foundation, Incorporated. The producer-engineer of this episode is Sean Ryan. Music by Soundspring Studio. The executive producer of How You Play the Game is Jack Furlong. For more information, visit osipfoundation.org.